Good morning everyone, and welcome back to Donnybrook and the seat of McEwen. My name's Jason McClintock, and it is wonderful to have Peter back here for the second time in 5 days. Also joined by Michael Suker this morning and Senator Sarah Henderson, and Lachlan and Russell from our hosts this morning. With that, I know we've got a lot to talk about, so I'm going to hand over to Peter. Thank you.
Jason, thanks very much. Look, great to be back here, and I think this is the epicentre. It's like many places around the country where we've got housing demand, where people just can't find accommodation, rental problems in capital cities. The housing situation in this country is a mess at the moment, and I want to make sure that we can clean up Labor's mess, and one of the ways in which we're going to do that is that we're going to provide $5 billion to create 500,000 homes. So we'll work with councils to create opportunities to help pay for critical infrastructure like water, like roads, like sewerage, and that way we can bring those blocks of land online. We are going to introduce a ban on foreign buyers so that we don't have those foreign buyers competing with young Australians at auctions, and that's a very important part of our plan as well. We've also made it known that we're going to deregister the CFMEU, which is really doubled the cost of construction in this country, and that's just driven up the cost of housing as well. So they are 3 very significant parts of our policy, but we don't stop there. We're also saying to young Australians that we want to help get you into a home as quickly as possible. So accessing super up to $50,000 will allow a young couple or a young individual to get into a home more quickly, and that is going to improve their net position as the price of the house increases over the course of their life. When they dispose of the house, we want to put the money back into superannuation so that that can compound to help them in retirement, and that's a very important part of that element as well. We've also announced, given that the government has brought in 1 million people over the last 2 years, which is a 70% increase than any other 2-year period in our country's history. So there has been this explosion in the Big Australia policy under Mr Albanese that he didn't take to the last election, never mentioned it to anyone. And over a 5-year period, the government's predicting they'll bring in about 1.8 million people. But as we know with every one of their predictions, the numbers have blown out. So that number is likely to go higher than 2 million people. And these people, of course, all need homes, and they want to either buy or rent. And in that situation, Australians are being forced out of home ownership, and rents are being driven up. And that's the problem that we want to fix. Now today we're here to announce, on top of our 25% cut to migration in this country, which we've outlined previously, we are going to announce some changes in relation to international student numbers. Now international student numbers are up by 65% under this government over the last 12 months. And when you think about that, that is what has contributed to the driving up of rents, particularly within Sydney and Melbourne, but capital cities otherwise. We want to provide support to regional universities, and we put in place a cap which will be 30,000 lower than what Labor has in place, or 80,000 lower than what the numbers were just a couple of years ago. So this is a very significant step that we're taking. It is all about making sure that we can do what we can to help young Australians get into home ownership more quickly, and how we can help with the rental crisis that Labor's created as well. We have a plan to get our economy back on track. When you look at what's happening with the international markets at the moment, when you look at what is happening with great uncertainty across the world, including here in Australia, we need to make sure that we have a coalition government managing the budget and the economy after the next election. Labor, as has been demonstrated here in Victoria, always taxes and spends, which is a wet blanket on the economy. It destroys enterprise, it destroys employment prospects for young people, and it means that, as we've seen under Labor over the last couple of years, 29,000 small businesses have gone broke, including many in the construction sector. So we are going to be a government of home ownership. I want to be the Prime Minister that restores the dream of home ownership, that has first and foremost in my mind, how can we help young Australians with affordability and accessibility to housing? And that's exactly what this announcement is about today. I'll ask Michael Suker to say a few words, and then Sarah, and I'm happy to take some questions.
Yeah. Well, firstly, thanks to our great candidate here in McEwen, Jason McClintock, for hosting us, and to Russell and Lachlan. Peter, thank you for your words, and to Senator Henderson as well. Anthony Albanese's Big Australia has been catastrophic for Australian renters and young Australians who hope to own their own home one day, with more than 1 million new migrants over just 2 years, at a time with a government delivering fewer housing starts, fewer housing completions, fewer home approvals and fewer first home buyers. I think it is one of the most catastrophic failures in government policy that most of us will have seen in our lifetime. As Peter Dutton says, it's unacceptable in this country that we accept a situation that Labor seems to want to accept, and that is that young Australians will potentially never have the prospect of owning their own home. We don't believe that. The Coalition believes that every Australian should have an opportunity of home ownership, and if you're a renter, you shouldn't be forced to pay nearly 20% higher rents as a result of this unsustainable migration that we have seen in the last couple of years. But it's going to get worse because the government has forecast 1.8 million people over the next 5 years. They've missed every target before by many hundreds of thousands, so I think most Australians understand it'll be more than 1.8 million when it's all said and done. And at a time when we're building fewer homes, that is disastrous. In this state, in Victoria, we've got a succession of Labor taxes supported by Anthony Albanese, his close allies here in the Victorian government, that, as Peter said, has put a wet blanket over the industry here in Victoria. It's harder to get homes out of the ground, and of course that's without even mentioning the unholy alliance between the Labor government and the CFMEU, which drives up costs. And let's remember, every single additional cost that the CFMEU drives into the cost of one of the homes behind me, or in an apartment, or in a townhouse development, those are costs that are not borne by the developer, they're not borne by the builder, those are costs that are passed on to the end purchaser, the young couple trying to scratch together that deposit to buy a home. That's what's at stake here, and so the announcement today of reducing the number of international students, which places huge demand on our housing market, is a good thing for young Australians renting and hoping to own their own home one day. One important statistic: for every single approval of a new student accommodation dwelling, for every single approval there's been 42 foreign students arrive under Labor's watch. So that's 42 foreign students for every single dwelling that's approved student accommodation. That's unacceptable. It's not a situation that we're willing to accept because, as I said, we are the party of home ownership, but increasingly we're here to support renters as well, who are competing in the same market against this huge demand being brought on by the government. I might ask you, Sarah, to say a few words.
Thanks, Michael. Well, as Peter and Michael has said, Labor has made a complete mess of immigration in this country, and that is having a massive impact on housing, particularly in the capital cities. And we have seen record numbers of international students coming into this country. There are now more than 850,000 international students, and most of them are studying in Melbourne and Sydney. That is where the big housing pressure is. So our lower cap, 30,000 at least lower than Labor's botched scheme, will be very much focused on driving housing availability and affordability, particularly in Melbourne and Sydney. That's where the excessive numbers of students are, and that's where we are focused. So we are very proud of standing up for Australian students, putting students first. Our universities do a wonderful job. They are at their very best when they are delivering high quality education and research, but this is all about getting the balance right. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. And importantly, Gaith's back on the track. Got his bandage on, that's nice. Very good. Okay, we started this side yesterday, so we might start this side. Andrew, you want to kick off, and then we'll work our way around.
I actually had a question about the superannuation hack that happened on Friday.
Okay.
That was reported. What do you think those superannuation funds should be doing? Do we need tighter cybersecurity regulations for super funds? And would you be concerned that perhaps there's complaints that the super funds weren't taking it very seriously? Would you be concerned that the union Labor links between those funds perhaps meant they were getting a bit of a free pass on cybersecurity?
Well, look, I think the onus really is on the super funds to do the right thing by their members. The amount of data now that's stored on every Australian because of the superannuation funds accounts that they have. it's personal data, it's financial data, it's bank account details, etc., etc. So there is a real onus on the super companies. Now, when I was Defence Minister, we put almost $10 billion into Operation Red Spice, which was to try and build up our defences, the Australian Cyber Security Centre as well as the Australian Signals Directorate, to provide support to critical infrastructure and to those systems of national significance as well. But as we've seen with Optus and with some of the health companies, etc., there clearly are vulnerabilities, and I think Australians have a reasonable expectation that if you're providing that data, it's protected. And I think the cosy relationship between the union funds and the government will always influence, as we've seen in other policy areas, the outcomes that the government arrives at. So I think there is a real explanation to be provided here, and I think it would be catastrophic for millions of Australians to be exposed because the systems hadn't been invested in.
Mr. Dutton, this is the second time that you've been in McEwen. Last week when you were here, you announced some major changes to $4.2 billion in infrastructure funding. Will you announce what the remaining $1.6 billion will be spent on before the election? And can you guarantee that Victorians will not be shortchanged infrastructure investment under your leadership?
Yeah, we made that commitment the other day. We're absolutely committed to investing into Victoria because the state government here has just been a disaster, and Anthony Albanese and Jacinta Allen are locked at the hip in terms of the suburban rail loop. It's a $200 billion cruel hoax. It's not going to happen, and that's why we announced the Melbourne Rail Link and Donnybrook Road and other infrastructure that we want to invest in here in Victoria. In McEwen, we've got a great candidate in Jason McClintock. He's worked hard, he's knocking on doors. He understands what people are going through. He understands the pressure that young families face when they want to buy a house, and it's just made harder and harder every day under this government. So we'll make sure that we invest in Victoria, and we've committed to all of that money coming to Victoria because the growth pains are here, particularly in outer metropolitan areas. The 25 cent a litre cut that we've announced in relation to the fuel tax, that will bring pressure off families immediately as well. The Prime Minister's option is a 70 cent a day tax cut in 15 months' time, which is just not going to cut it, and it's going to make it really hard for families when the Prime Minister is promising electricity prices and gas prices and fuel prices and the cost of a new car will be higher under a new Labor government. So I want to make sure that we can manage our economy well, we can provide a restoration of the dream of home ownership, which is exactly what we're here to reinforce today. And we'll provide further detail in relation to that.
Mr. Dutton, how did you arrive at the 30,000 less than Labor's 270, and are you willing to have a fight with the unis now?
Well, we're happy to have a fight on behalf of home owners in this country, and I want to make sure that the stories that we've heard today about young people being locked out of homes, the government's brought in under their Big Australia policy, one person every 44 seconds. They didn't tell anything of that story before the last election, and so when Australians can't afford a home or when rents have gone up, in part it's because international student numbers are up by 65%, and we have worked with the sector, we've looked at the numbers. The most recent numbers obviously aren't available to us, but there's more work that we can do with Treasury and Finance to get the up-to-date numbers. But what we know of the last couple of years is that there has been a dramatic increase in the cost of rent, and the dream of home ownership has been lost by young Australians, and the coalition government is going to restore it, and we are going to get our country back on track, and we'll do that by making sure that housing affordability and availability is again a reality for young Australians.
Mr. Dutton, University Australia modelling shows that each international student contributes about $72,000 to the economy a year. A cut of 80,000 students would cost about $5.8 billion. Are you comfortable with this hit to the economy at a time of Trump's tariffs causing so much uncertainty?
Well, I want to make sure that we can get young Australians into houses. That's really our main priority here. Now, the international student market is a great and lucrative market for the universities. They've made literally billions of dollars over the last few years, but as Michael points out, when you've got 42 international students to one new accommodation place being built or unit being built, it doesn't stack up, and I want to make sure that we can help young Australians get into housing. We've got a plan on the supply side to create 500,000 new homes. We want to stop foreign buyers from competing against young Australians at home auctions, and I want to make sure that we can bring the cost of construction down, which is near the highest in the world thanks to the CFMEU. The government won't do anything about the CFMEU because, as Jacinta Allen is and Anthony Albanese is, that they're in partnership with the CFMEU. And I just don't think that's in our country's best interests. And we have to take decisions that are hard decisions, but are right for our country. And for young people to get into a home, to be able to start a family, to have economic security, that is at the heart of what the Liberal Party, the coalition, is about. And that's what we will take to the next election. Mr Albanese's Big Australia policy is going to continue, and housing will just become more and more unavailable and less affordable under an elected Albanese.
Mr. Dutton.
What do you feel
Mr. Dutton, Labor has today announced 30% off home electric batteries under a scheme to give thousands in taxpayer subsidies to those householders. They claim that will shave $1,000 a year off the power bills of those customers. Do you buy that claim? And today, can you put a dollar figure on how much customers will save under the gas plan you have put forward?
Well, let's have a look at the $275 that the Prime Minister promised before the last election. He looked the Australian people in the eye and said on 97 occasions, your power bills will come down by $275. Do you know that since he's been elected, he will not mention that figure? Jim Chalmers, in this embarrassing sort of comedy skit, will talk about anything but the $275 figure. Now, power prices have gone up by $1,300, and Australians know it in their power bills that they're getting each month or each quarter. But it's not just your household power bill that's gone up, it's also the local IGA store, and it's the local butcher, and it's the local, corner store. That's why grocery prices have gone up by 30%. And it's just having an inflationary impact across the community. Now, we've said that with our Gas for Australians policy, that will bring the price of wholesale gas down by 15%. Now, that is significant across the economy because, as BlueScope's pointed out, the biggest steel manufacturers in the country, they are going to have a reduction in their cost of energy. Now, that means for the units behind us and the houses in front of us, steel is a major component. We went to a brickworks the other day. They are paying 3 times the cost for gas and electricity in this country compared to their factory in the United States. That's why bricks are much more expensive here, and that's why construction costs are much more expensive. So we'll have more to say about electricity prices over the coming months, over the coming weeks, but I just say this to every Australian. Mr Albanese is promising higher electricity prices at this election. His admission today that he's going to have to compensate people with batteries because his power prices will go up in the next term of government. I just think people will see through it. Prices are going to go up for electricity under a re-elected Albanese government, and I don't think Australians can afford it.
Mr Dutton, there's no doubt if you reduce student numbers, you'll reduce foreign student numbers, you'll reduce pressure on housing. I don't think that's in question. But have you done any modelling, any work with your plan today on what effect it will have on our tertiary education sector? Or is it simply a case of, well, sorry guys, housing is a bigger priority, the tertiary education sector is just going to have to take this as a cop?
Tim, we've done an enormous amount of work on this policy, and we know that it's good for young Australians who want to get into a home. But importantly, we've also looked at the international experience. So when we look at Ivy League universities and we look at universities overseas otherwise, there's a completely different mix in relation to the domestic student numbers comparative to the international student numbers. Australia is an outlier, and there has just been a complete racket underway over the last few years where Australians have been locked out of housing. And yes, the G8 have made a lot of money, and the other universities in regional areas have talked about what the G8, Sydney University, Melbourne University in particular, have done. So our problem is that it's been distortionary to the housing market. When you bring in 1 million people over 2 years, 70% more than any period in our country's history, you know that the Prime Minister is creating a problem. Jack up the cost of construction, make it harder for builders to operate on building sites because of the CFMEU, close down the supply of housing. You create a mess, and Australians know it. And it's only a coalition government that can clean that mess up. I'm going to be the Prime Minister of this country that restores the dream of home ownership, and we can do that in a sensible, measured way. And this is the latest iteration, the latest part of our positive plan to get young Aussies into housing as quickly as possible, and to make sure that rents are affordable again which they're not under this.
Mr. Dutton, the Property Council says that student caps would have eased rental pressures by less than 1%. What evidence do you have that this will actually make a difference to housing pressure?
So if you've got 42 international students for every one student unit being built, that has a huge impact, and Australians know it. So when you look at the price of the cost of rents over the last couple of years, they've skyrocketed under this government. And in big part that's been because of Australia, because of Mr Albanese's Big Australia policy.
Sorry, do you have evidence? Do you have any modelling that suggests it will ease
well,
housing pressure?
we can point you to what has happened to rentals over the course of the last couple of years. And when you flood the market with 65% increase of international students, particularly into Sydney and Melbourne, you see an increase in the cost of rentals, and you also lock young Australians out of the dream of home ownership. So we have a lot to offer Australians, a lot more than the Labor Party does. Mr Albanese is going into this election being very clear to the Australian people. Your electricity bill's going higher. You're going to pay more for fuel. Your cost of a Ford Ranger is going up by $14,000. The cost of a RAV4 under this government by 2029 will go up by $9,000. This government is going to jack up the cost of everything. Grocery prices have gone up by 30%. I'm going to bring down the cost of all of these key ingredients in people's budgets. That's what the coalition government will do, including rents. And we've got a disaster that Labor's created. It's going to get worse over the next 3 years because they can only govern with the Greens. And I think as we come closer to this election, people realise that there is a real sliding doors moment for our country. A lot of Australians are hurting because of bad economic policies made by this government, and we're going to clean that mess up and help get our country back.
Mr. Dutton.
Back to Naveen's question on the subsidies for batteries. Do you support that policy, or do you think it only benefits people who can afford batteries in the first place?
Well, Andrew, I'm strongly supportive of batteries, but they're very expensive, and for the government to say to people here, we were just talking to our host before about young people who are now having to sell their houses because they just can't keep up with the mortgage repayments and the electricity bills and the insurance costs, etc., etc. They only bought into the market a couple of years ago. That's the reality of what's happening in the suburbs across the country. There are 29,000 small businesses that have gone broke, and behind every one of those stories, somebody's lost their home or lost their life savings. And the point that I'd make is that for $10,000 for a battery, maybe that's the cost after this subsidy. I think you're talking about higher income families being in a position to pay for that. And I just don't know that the next door neighbour who can't afford to pay for that battery is going to subsidise the battery for me or for you on higher incomes. I think what it is though, and this is a really important point, the government's announcement today is confirmation that electricity prices are certain to go up higher under a Labor government. And the Prime Minister's broken promise of $275, I mean, the Labor lies are racking up and stacking up under this government. In this electorate, for example, that the bulk billing rate is down by 10% or so. Like, it's quite significant. And it's the case right across the country, and yet the many-scare lies that Labor's telling at the moment would lead you to a different conclusion. So it's true in energy policy as well. What they've been doing is pursuing this ideological renewables-only policy that's driven up the cost of electricity, and we are going to clean up this mess and help Australians have just affordability in their lives again.
Mr. Dutton,
why did you oppose Labor's plan to cut international students last year?
Because their plan was no plan at all. Every number that they've projected has blown out by hundreds of thousands. The NOM figures, the net overseas migration figures, in relation to every component within the migration program, Australia's Big Australia policy that wasn't declared before the last election has led to pressure on infrastructure, it's led to pressure on housing, pressure on rents, and the government had no plan at all to deal with this. And the plan that we announced today is about getting young Aussies into homes more quickly and helping them afford that home. And that's what a coalition government will deliver.
Mr. Dutton, as
No, we'll go to Claire first.
So the cap on foreign students is as a percentage of the total number of students at the university. Can't universities circumnavigate this by just increasing the number of domestic students? And also, we're in Donnybrook, that's like an hour and a half away from the University of Melbourne on the train. How is a student cap in the city going to help someone buy a house out here?
Well, a few points. Firstly, we have looked very closely at the way in which the agreements work between the government and the universities, and we can put requirements in because the Commonwealth obviously is the funder of the universities, so we will meet our policy objectives through those arrangements. We can work with the universities very constructively, and we intend to do so. But this policy is about making sure that Australians can afford homes again. In relation to the travel time that you raise, an hour and a half. If you're spending an hour and a half in a car, even a little Mazda 2, or if you've got a bigger sort of gas guzzling car, you're probably going to save, as a university student under our policy, maybe 2 tanks a week. It's very true, you're right, it's a good point. And maybe 2 tanks a week if you're driving.
You support the young people getting into home.
Well, hang on, I'm just talking about petrol. You raised a very good point of how good our petrol policy is. I just want to finish this point. So 2 tanks a week, I guess, is your point. And so that's probably $30 a week you're going to save as a university student. That is a huge savings. I think that is a fantastic point, Claire. Now, in relation to housing, students are buying houses, people are buying houses out in metropolitan areas, out of metropolitan areas. This crunch is in the capital cities, it's across the country. There is no part of the country that hasn't been negatively impacted by Mr Albanese's Big Australia policy. And we are going to rein migration in. We're cutting migration because we want to put Australians first. We want Australians into homes, and that's exactly what we're doing.
Mr Dutton, as Julia said, you voted with the Greens to block Labor's cap, and you're only vowing to reduce the intake by another 30,000. Was it really worth kicking the can down the road for another year?
Well, Sarah might have something to say.
No, that's not the case at all. The Labor's scheme was so botched that they actually withdrew the legislation from the Parliament. There was no vote. It was a disaster, and that's why we opposed it.
But was it worth kicking the can down the road for another year?
I just think if you have a look at what Labor's done, they've created an enormous mess in the economy, across the economy. You look at what they've done in relation to housing. They've driven up the cost of housing because of their Big Australia policy. We're cutting migration because we want to get young Australians into housing more quickly. Mr Albanese is promising higher electricity costs at this election. He's promising higher fuel costs, higher costs for a motor vehicle, higher costs for groceries. We have a plan to deal with the economy, to make sure that through our economic management we can help people get into housing, to reduce the cost of groceries, to reduce the cost of electricity, the cost of gas. If we do that, we can deal with the international shocks that are coming. Labor can't manage the economy. They've demonstrated it year after year at a state and federal level, and it's in live example at the moment here in Victoria. We are going to make sure that we can manage the economy and bring inflation down, because for young families here, what they don't want is Labor's promise of higher interest rates after the election, which is a certainty if they keep spending, which they will do in a big spending Labor Greens government. That will drive inflation higher, drive interest rates higher, and that will crush families who already have mortgages.
Thank you very much.